Hey everybody, welcome back to Doormat Mom No More. I'm Doormat Mom and we cover estrangement every week in my podcast. We have wonderful guests who talk about it from all different angles, and whether it be estranged parents, whether it be attorneys that deal with estrangement, whether they be therapists and mental health professionals, whether it be other professionals that are trying to contend with it in their own way. We know it's an epidemic. It's not just a national epidemic. It is bleeding over internationally. In fact, this week, I had a huge influx of estranged parents join my Facebook group, Doormat Mom No More, from the UK and every territory there. Unbelievable. So our message is getting out, and we are building this community person by person. And that's unfortunate, but also fortunate. So today I have on the show, I've been waiting for this conversation to happen. Christine Droney, she's a licensed clinical social worker. She deals with grief, but she also deals with estrangement, parent-child estrangement. So I wanted her on the show. I came across her when I saw a video of hers that gave some great advice about listening to TikTok or Instagram mental health professionals, and the way that they are adding to this epidemic by giving advice that isn't always so helpful. So I'm gonna play the video, and then I'm gonna show you the slide, and then I'm going to bring her on. So let me pull this up, and we're going to run the video.
Hi, good morning. I was just thinking about something. When you're looking at therapists or mental health clinicians, who may even be influencers who are looking to educate in their own way, just remember they don't know you. They don't know anything about you. They don't know your history. They don't know what you're going through. They don't know anything about the people in your lives that you may be having difficulties with, or the people in your lives that are supporting you. So just keep in mind that social media is just social media, and use it wisely. That's my recommendation.
I think it's a recommendation that every good therapist should be saying out there, because that's exactly right. They don't know you, and taking their advice to heart, or even the criticism, can be really cutting and really damaging to potentially mending an estrangement with a parent or with whoever, because estrangement is happening not just between parents and children, although that seems to be the bulk of it. It's more so, it's happening between siblings, or it's just it bleeds over. So I'm going to bring up, just so that you see see the many letters behind this woman's name. I'm going to bring up, that's Christine Droney. Look at all those letters. All right. She's going to tell us a little bit about her background, how she got into it. It's a very interesting story. And she just returned from a trip from Ireland. And she's going to share how that plays into what she's doing now as well. So let me get that off the stage, and then we're going to bring her on. Hi, you.
Good afternoon. I was going to say good morning. Thanks for inviting me on, Laura. I appreciate it, and having this conversation with you. So, full disclosure, I have read your book, and I feel like it's a very brave book, because you have put a face, a name, and you have spoken about something that's very taboo, because parents are not supposed to say anything derogatory or perceived derogatory about their children. So what I feel is conversations are helpful. And so you are trying to lead a conversation. That's how I perceive this.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, it was not only something I felt I needed to do to get the conversation going, after finding so many other parents in the same, boat, so to speak. It was very therapeutic in writing it, and also telling other parents, exposing that there is a huge community out there, because I didn't know that either until I started down this road. And then all of a sudden what turned into a single person became, for lack of a better word, a community, and now a movement, which is really which we've given a voice to. And so thank you. I really appreciate it. I worked hard on it. So yeah, it's
You
meant
know,
to
and
be.
I just want to say disclaimer, when I read your book, I also found a lot of love for your daughter. So it's interesting because when I see your Instagram, people pick out, just certain words, and they haven't read the book, or, whatever. And so again, that's why I'm saying we have to have these conversations. We have to talk about things, because if we don't, it's a societal issue. So this is the importance of whether people like you or don't, or like what you've written or don't, we have to talk about it. And as clinicians, we see it in our practice.
Right. And I think, and I really appreciate you saying that, because when I was writing the book, I was very careful not to overstep or not to expose so much, because I do love my daughter. I do love my daughter. And I think part of the initial hurt and was the fact that I love her so deeply that I was stunned when this happened. And then I came to find out that other parents had that same story, where they were stunned. They love their kids so deeply. They were, there for them every step of the way, and very different than what you would think would lead to this. And then all of a sudden this happens, and you're just completely sideswiped. And I know people say, oh, how can you be sideswiped? Kids don't leave good parents. No, they do. They do. And you remain in ignorance if you continue to say that, because today's estrangement is very different than, let's say, yesterday's estrangement. So that's my answer to that.
And also, parents, as we said before, are more invested in the parent-child relationship because it's been a long time. We're invested emotionally, many times out helping them through school, etc. And it's not a transactional relationship, but the reality is parents are invested in their relationships with their children. So I think that's important to note as well. So I definitely saw that your book was written with love and with respect. But interestingly enough, one of the suggestions when I work with parents, because I work in really hard spaces, so I'm probably not the therapist to see if you don't like your mother-in-law. I work in, so for instance, I know from reading your book, your husband died, your children were very young. So we would consider you a solo parent. You have no backup, right? So that would have changed the trajectory of your family because it was not something expected, right? And so I work with a lot of solo parents, and just having the death of a parent, the death of a sibling, will change the lived experience for everyone in the home. And I always say, it's for everyone. No family member, sees things the same way. So no sibling lives in the same house. No parent lives in the same house, meaning perspective. We can all be in the same situation and everybody's going to have a different perspective. But I work a lot. And so I have a bunch of letters after my name, but I work, primarily in grief and loss, which is why I see a lot of I see parents, and I also see adult children, believe it or not, because of the grief and loss piece.
Right.
And I work in, I've worked in chronic illness. I work in just really, really hard spaces. But this has become, I've seen more and more of the estrangement or no contact being different than estrangement, because you can be estranged and still have some contact, but when you're no contact, you're kind of done.
Right.
So I'm seeing more of it in my practice. I'm hearing more of it from my colleagues. And it's quite sad. I do enjoy Dr. Pilmer's work, Fault Lines, his book from the Cornell Estrangement Institute, which we can talk about.
Yeah, I'm going to bring it up real quick because, so that Fault Lines was written by Dr. Carl Pilmer out of Cornell University. He did the largest study on estrangement In the Nation was it In the Nation or? And it was a fascinating book. I read it cover to cover, and I found it extremely helpful. If you can get that book, please get it. It's worth the read. But go ahead now, because I know you recommended that book to me, even though you didn't realize you did. We were talking about it, and then I picked it up.
Yeah, and I think why it's so important as a parent or an adult child is to educate yourself, because, I'm a mother of adult children and I'm a grandmother, and none of us are immune to this.
No.
And I think that's a really important, if anything comes out of this work, none of us are immune to this happening. We can think we have the perfect family, and it can happen to any of us. Okay.
And that's what makes it so, that's what makes it such a contention based argument between those who think it could never happen to them and those that had happened to, because we all think we were them. And, and then all of a sudden this happened to us. So all we're doing is saying, hey, no, you're wrong. It can happen to you. You just don't see it yet. It can happen. So where, the people are speaking out saying, hey, we're ringing the bell. We got to get this talked about. We got to address it ahead of time, because otherwise it's gonna not only exasperate, but it's also they're gonna have it in their own homes. And you just came back from Ireland, and you're saying, and I know it because we have the influx I saw, especially this week. How many homes is it happening in over there?
Well, there's so Dr. Pillemer's work at the Cornell Family Estrangement Institute, the work was, I believe, started or completed in 2021. So it's new. There has not been a lot of work. Joshua Coleman has written the book on estrangement, more on reconciliation and letter writing and repairing. Dr. Pillemer's work, I think, is groundbreaking in that it's an educational piece. That, hey, you know what? Everybody needs to read this because it could happen. And so it's eye-opening. Just from his study, they had in 2021, 27% of US adults, or 67 million people, are estranged from a parent, a grandparent, a sibling. So that was, during the pandemic. And the pandemic also helped with estrangement because people were able to be in their pods. You know what I mean? They were able to, right? And then, when we look at this from a public health issue, which I'm very concerned about, right? It impacts, missing work, getting sick. It impacts the greater community, which we can go on and on about. Intergenerational loss, like it goes, and this is what goes. When you read his book, this is why we all need to say this can happen to me, and I want to try to. So they call it the riff and then the rupture. So we want to get it before the rupture so that we can even talk to our kids and they can talk to us or siblings and say, hey, you know what, like we have to get on this and talk about this. And again, I want a disclaimer, not all relationships are great. Not all are salvageable, and not all are safe. Right? We know that, like, we're not talking about those relationships.
No, we're not. We're definitely not talking about those relationships. We're talking about the ones that, there's a lot of hope there. There's a lot of, needed understanding there. There's a lot of revelation there. And there's, a loving parent who was a normal parent that made normal mistakes, whatever normal is, but we can pretty much assume what normal is, right? And are sideswiped, and then kids who are, I think a lot of what's happening out there is happening because of external influences. I mean, I do understand that parents have the most influence over their children up to age 7. After that, it is their external environment and peers that actually have the influence. So between 7 and 18, and we see it in the homes, especially in high school, where there's a lot of growth. There's a lot of peer pressure. There's a lot of social situations. There's a lot of, there's also just a lot of hormonal stuff that's going on. There's a lot of confusion in those years in the home, because what you think is just, okay, maybe they're having a temper tantrum because, you know, they're getting their what, or they're under the pressure of their high school test, or they're, you know, maybe that's happening, you know, or they're developing and they're learning how to use, you know, to hold on to their personalities or their temper or whatever. And you're just trying to give them a little grace when you really shouldn't be giving them the grace. And that's, I think there's a lot of confusion during that high school, you know, era. And so there's just a lot going on. So what do you do? Like, that's the other side. What do you do when you who was once the main influence in their lives now have someone living in your home that's under all this other influence, and they really don't want to listen to you? And and then you're in situations, whether it be a single parent household, you know, you're in situations where you're solo parent household, you're in situations where, you know, there's a sudden change in the environment that is significant, that, you know, leaves a mark and, you know, throws everything up in the air. And yes, you have all those things. And then on top of it, you have all the other things like social media, right? So you have social media, you have tech, you have, you know, political influences. You honestly, you have, you know, certain leanings in schools where they spend a bunch of their time. There's a lot. So, you know, what do you do as a parent trying to make heads or tails of this? And, you know,
Yeah, I think that social media certainly plays a large role. That's why I did that little PSA. I don't monetize my Instagram. It's not a large Instagram, but I think it's important to say, you know, I don't know you. You don't, you know, people don't know you, and you're listening to advice. And I know when I recorded that, there was one therapist who is also a coach, influencer, I would say, with hundreds of thousands of followers. And I was appalled because the commentary back was almost like, if my parent dies, that's great. Like, it was so vile. And this therapist was like feeding it, right? And you're saying to yourself, and it's not because she was a young therapist, she was a young therapist, so it's not because she's young, it's because you can't do that. It's unethical. There's an efficacy thing here, right? So when you see people writing these comments, and there are hundreds of them on that particular therapist's Instagram, you as a therapist need to pull back and say, what am I putting out there to elicit such venom? Right. Especially, we don't know the mental health of a parent, of a child. We don't know if, you know, what's going on in the house. Like you said, if there's been loss, if there's alcoholism. Guess what? When you're raising a child, there can be job loss. You can be taking care of a grandparent with dementia. You can have a spouse that dies. You can have a child that dies. You can have chronic illness. You can lose your job. You cannot be able to pay the electric bill. And guess what? That child will feel those stressors. And most parents are trying the very best they can. And perhaps the child is like, well, when I was whatever, you know, you were freaking out. Well, yeah, I probably was, because I'm a person, you know. So a lot of times adult children don't see their parents as people, right? Mom or dad have, you know, like I always say, parenting is an Olympic sport and dangerous. And, you know, parents have capes and they fly. And so you're supposed to anticipate every problem and you're supposed to solve every problem. But in reality, we are people, parents are people, and we also are going through a lot of things as people because, you know, we're trying to live life. It's a lived experience. So I think that, a lot of what I see is unduly harsh towards parents. Right.
Right. And I think that, you know, the natural progression, you know, in the healthy mind of a child that, you know, moves into actual adulthood is that they start seeing their parents as people. They start, because life doles out life to them, and they start realizing and connecting the dots that, hey, now I understand, because I'm now dealing with this. I didn't see it from this point of view. Now I understand. And that's where the parents get back the grace that they've been trying to give their kids as they've been growing up, and trying to help mentor that, you know, growing up. in a way that's healthy. But a lot of these young adults today that have gone estranged, they never jump out of that childlike mind, childlike thinking. It's almost as if they're looking at you and they still hold you in like as that super person, but you've fallen. You were super person and you like just you Superman just like crashed into a wall. And it doesn't seem, and that's where when you see these elongated estrangements, because in many cases, there comes a point where you got to see the parent as a human being and understanding, and have some hard conversations. I mean, I've had hard conversations with my other children in relation to when they were growing up, or when they were or they're grown up, and they were venturing to have this new thing, and I was like, well, could we? And they're like, oh no, here's the reason why I don't want to, and this is what oh, you know what, now I understand. I get that. Thank you for telling me. So this way I can then now like give you like my blessing to do what you need to do. I get that, because every parent wants the best for their kids, and that's the best.
And it's interesting. Adam Grant, who's a psychologist, very prominent from Penn, and Brene Brown, they had a conversation. It was maybe it was in the New York Times or the Atlantic, but they were talking about, you're going to have 15 hard conversations a day. Like life is hard. The longer you live, it's hard. And with that said, parents also. This is why I love Dr. Pilmer's work, because we now have texting. So if your child is growing up, and they want to say, hey, you know what, mom or dad, I want you to pull back on the texting a little bit. It's overwhelming me. Or I just got married, or I just had a baby and I'm just trying to figure out how to do life. Can you back off a little bit? Right? They're the things. But what happens when you're conflict avoidant and you don't have these conversations, then what it does is it's like, I'm going no contact. I'm done, right? And so I think from a societal shift, the advent of definitely social media, definitely things like Instagram, I would say TikTok, which I have never been on, so I don't know TikTok. Definitely that is a feeder. And, I think that we have to look at like the cultural shift, the shift in how we consume information. And also parents do need to step back a little bit and say, you know what, maybe I need to hold off on not text every day, or not have these expectations will lead to disappointment, because my adult child is trying to find their way in life just like I did, but we didn't have texting. We didn't, we didn't call our parents every day. So we have a lot of societal changes, and parents also have to not get their feelings hurt as well. Right?
Yeah, I would agree with you there. I think definitely and it's okay to have that conversation. I mean, I definitely understand that conversation. Texting can open up a can of worms for parents when they're constantly on top of their kids, and when their kid is saying, I just need a little bit of space, or I just need a little quiet time. It's nothing against you. I just need some time in my room, or it's just everyone needs time in their room, so to speak, and especially, and like you said, we were talking about the social media. We just had friends that would come over after school. We'd hang out at each other's houses, and that was a lot. They have a world of people talking to them, whether they're friends or just people talking to them, so to speak, and that is now part of their noise balloon around their head. And so sometimes they just need to learn to decompress, and you want them to learn that. You want them to be able to appreciate and live in quiet too, because that's how that's the only time you actually get to know yourself, is if you're sitting and in your quiet zone for a little bit and figuring things out in your head. So
yes. So I think it's important to just recognize, I mean, we can't go into all of them, but there's been so many social and cultural changes, and just in the past 10 years, just,
right.
And that parents, I'll be 60 in June. I didn't have all of this, right? When I was raising my kids, it was very different, and kids rode bicycles, and it was kind of, I would say, a little more innocent society. And there was no way in heck my kids would have been exposed to what kids are now exposed to. So the parent is competing with what you don't even know. You don't even know what you're competing with, right? So those echo chambers or the chat GPT, or, somebody will put into chat GPT, my mom said this, how do I respond? Of course, the chat GPT is more than likely going to tell you what you want to hear, instead of saying, hey mom, I'm having a problem, or dad or brother or sister or grandma, whatever. Now we're doing things like that. So I think that's why the conversations that talk about that is so important, because so that we can, kind of get before the rift, get before the rupture. And a lot of people are afraid to speak about estrangement or no contact because they're afraid they'll tick their kids off, or, they may even upset a parent, or they're just afraid of it because it's like it could happen to you. Yes, it could. That's why we need these conversations.
Yeah, I agree. I think that is very real. I know some estrangement content creators whose kids have found their TikToks or found their Instagrams, and actually are coping with another fracture in their family because the parent is talking about one issue, and the other kid doesn't like it. So now that's the next fracture, which is devastating to the parent because they're already hurting from the one fracture that they didn't expect. Now they're getting another fracture. But the reality is, if we don't talk about it, it's just going to grow. Things like this grow in silence. They don't grow when there's conversation around it, and I think that's critical. That's critical to solving problems. It's all about communication, and especially in this day and time, and especially when kids are talking to each other in social media, advising each other, and then you have the trends that are happening. They do call this estrangement and an epidemic, or a trend. But if you see some of the comments that happen as a result of estrangement content from estranged adult kids, or therapists that don't particularly that treat the estranged adult kids but don't particularly want to know what's going on in the head of the parent, those comments are very telling. And to the degree of the anger and the viciousness, that's very telling of in this situation and of this group, right? It's very telling, and it's very concerning. It's right now. Is that a TikTok warrior? Is that an Instagram warrior? Or is that how they really feel, so to speak? You know what I'm saying?
Well, I mean, when you see certain folks on social media, there's a lot of money in estrangement. You know what I mean? When you're saying, and there's some good. So most therapists are not on social media. Most therapists that work in this field are not on social media. And, my recommendation is, if you are going to see a therapist, you vet them. And you say, whether you're a parent, whether you're an adult child, whether you are a parent that's seeking counseling, you sit down and you say, what are your credentials? How many estrangement cases have you worked in, or no contact? What are your qualifications to sit with us? And you have to vet whomever you're seeing. It's like if you go to a cardiologist for your cardiac issue. So the same thing. And I think there's difficulty getting in with therapists, et cetera, in a lot of areas. There's access, issues, but still, this is a big deal. And you have a lot of, in that therapy room, you're trying to build rapport, but you have a lot of ability to influence somebody by what you say. And so from my perspective, I would never encourage or, if any of this, because the thing is, you're only hearing one side. And of course, that's the person you're in a therapeutic alliance with. So it would be irresponsible to say, yeah, go no contact with your parent, or go no contact with your sibling, or, you're really trying to, boundaries are not to, they're not to break us. They're actually to help us come together. Right.
Right.
But now it's like they're weaponized, that word boundaries. I have to watch my boundaries. Well, if we know what boundaries really are, they are to get us to talk. They're to get us to figure out like what's going on, like what is acceptable to you right now, mom. And the other thing I think that happens with a lot of adult kids, they don't realize their parents also have boundaries.
Right. Right. Right.
You know,
You're not supposed to have a boundary as a parent. They're supposed to
well,
have the boundaries.
like
Yeah.
I said, your book, that's why your book is taboo. And that's why I think, you get a lot of people, that will write things to you, but you have a lot of people that are really watching you, because you're not supposed to say anything,
Right.
what is perceived derogatory. But what happens is, a lot of times parents they're done, they're exhausted. I mean,
They're
you've
exhausted.
spent years raising kids, whether your child feels you did a good job or not, whether you had financial means or not, it causes an enormous amount of it. So I go back to, and Dr. Pilmer's work talks about this as well. It's a public health issue, because it
It is.
causes a lot of chronic stress. Chronic
Mm-hmm.
stress in the body causes a lot of inflammation. It
Mm-hmm.
causes spikes in cortisol. It causes us to lose, time from work. It causes us to lose sleep. It causes us to not eat. It causes, it can cause depression. It can cause anxiety. I mean, you're at risk for a lot of chronic illness. And I think parents need to, the first reaction parents have when they're like, my kid doesn't want to talk to me, they start pleading their case and saying, but I did this and I was this. Don't
Yeah.
plead your case. First thing you need to do is time out and say, how am I going to take care of myself, and what does that look like?
Right. Do getting back to the boundaries, and I'm going to say something else about the health issue, public health crisis. Boundaries, I look at boundaries as channels.
Mm-hmm.
So the boundary is just imagine, you're in one room, your child's in the other room. It's a channel between the two rooms, right? It's not a wall between the two rooms, it's a channel, right? You're still supposed to be able to move between the two rooms. You're not supposed to put up a cement wall and then the rooms are done. That's what a boundary is. But you have to accept that both sides, both rooms have, a piece of that channel. That's what it is. And secondly, this is something that I've been very concerned about for so many estranged parents, because yes, they're dealing with health issues. They're
Mm-hmm.
dealing with depression. A third of them have thought about committing suicide. They're so devastated by this. They're having broken heart syndrome. All right, I've heard that's been happening. Their blood pressure has gone up. Right, they're literally their physicality is being affected, and you look at that and you say, well, how long can the body really deal with that before it develops something else? So you move very quickly to the next thought in your head, which is, well, if I have, my heart's broken, well, am I going to eventually, the pressure of it and the sadness is going to give me a heart attack? If my stomach is constantly churning and I'm constantly stewing, am I going to stew my way into cancer? If my blood pressure is up all the time because I'm so sad, and I tell you, I hear from these parents, my heart breaks for them. Are they going to have a stroke? And it's not, look, you can't blame the child for that per se. That's just the norm. That's a response that the parent is having from just being in this situation. But it doesn't make it any less damaging to the parent's physical nature, right? So what do you do in that situation? Because it's very hard to pull yourself out of it. If you cared so much to be upset over this. I mean, the abusive parent, the one that really doesn't give it a crap, so to speak, the one that really just doesn't care. It doesn't care. Doesn't care today. Doesn't yesterday. Doesn't care today. Doesn't care tomorrow. They're not stewing.
Right.
It's the parent that has put their heart and soul into this child, that wonders what happened and would have said they were sorry if something really happened, given the opportunity. But many of them don't even know what happened.
Well, and that's where, Dr. Pilmer's work and, some other folks, they talk about the rift and the rupture. And usually, it's some small things, but usually it's something that people have two different, versions of what happened. And oftentimes, nobody can even really remember. So, we know that through the work that's been done, it's best to kind of, if you're going to try to make amends, so to speak, you both can't be right. So you have to start from a place where we're going to start not fresh, because that's a word that's kind of, you know what I mean? But we have to start from a point where we can't sit down and rehash everything. But yeah, things have changed. And, how do we approach this new phase of our lives and this new relationship as, adult, child, and parent? If there's, in fact, in one part of your book, which, comes up a lot when we talk about including a new, like an in-law, son-in-law, daughter-in-law, we know that, that new relationship and that family that comes along with, that person has a huge impact on your child. So it changes your family system, right? And then the other thing is, a lot of times, and we see this a lot in high conflict divorce. So high conflict divorce is probably where you will have the longest period of estrangement and maybe never reconciliation. So for instance, with that, what would happen, right, if you didn't see your mother or your father for 20 years and you've told your husband, my parent did X, Y, Z, and everybody thinks that they're a real abuser, and you can't reconcile because you've lied to everybody. Like, so your perceived, maybe I shouldn't say lie, your perception of what happened, you've put it out there, and everybody believes that your parent is this ogre, right? This monster. So that can make reconciliation impossible, because there's been so many stories told. How do you untell those stories, right? And that's high conflict divorce, which usually is 2 to 5%. And some states, like the state I live in Pennsylvania, have done a really good job. They changed law almost 2 years ago, to where now parents have to text through an app. So it's memorialized in high conflict divorce. They're doing much better with 50-50 parenting to, again, eliminate the parental alienation. But I mean, I shared a story with you about a young man, I think, when we spoke. And I mean, it goes to this young man has the father was estranged, not by choice, but he had children from a first marriage, children from a second marriage, and these children got along famously because, but there was a lot of alienation on the part of the other parent, and there was an extraordinary amount of legal conflict, right? So this is before, you're going back 20 years ago. And so this young man was like, he's the sibling, doesn't remember anything, because the other siblings that are his full siblings, they can remember, what happened with the original siblings. So, I mean, it's really sad, because in these high conflict divorce situations, like the, I'm speaking about, so this young man, he goes, the Dr. Coleman calls it yo-yoing, or going sideways. So instead of contacting your estranged parent, you're going to yo-yo to a sibling. That's how you're going to get in, right? So this young man, I mean, the sister, who he hadn't seen in 25 years. So last time she saw him, he's 3, she's like in her 40s. And, she's like, can we meet up? And he's like, what do I do? Like, I don't really know her, but sure. And, it's so sad. It's like he meets up with her, in a big city, and he, she's talking to him about all these memories, and he has to say to her, but I'm your 28-year-old brother. I'm not 3. Like, and what I see is wasted time, and I see sadness and sorrow. And, and it's interesting, because with alienation, and you had that attorney on, with alienation, there's a lot of high moral ground. There's very black and white thinking, and that other parent is no good. There's nothing you can think of with that other parent. But in these kinds of cases as well, there's so much grief and loss with the siblings, because then this siblings have children and there's intergenerational loss. So the parent doesn't see the grandparent, the siblings don't have relationships with, so it's very, very, this is why we need to talk about it.
This is why we need to talk about all of it, all of it. One of the things I loved about Dr. Pilmer's book, and I put this as a question out to my audience, and it was very interesting to see the responses. Dr. Pilmer said, if you want to reconcile, the most successful reconciliation dynamic, the lead up to reconciling, according to his study, the ones that were most successful in reconciling did three things. One, they accepted that the stories of the past were different and they didn't push it. Two, they didn't expect an apology. They were not expecting of an apology. If one came later on, that would be great. That's the icing on the cake. But the reality is, don't expect an apology to begin again, and don't expect an apology at any time. Just be okay with not getting an apology on either side. And then three is just make the relationship better than today than it was in the past. Yeah. That's it. That's what you do if you want to reconcile. That's the most successful. So I put this out to my followers, and it was interesting to see what the response was. There were some, and then I did a follow-up video, which I thought was very interesting, because I said, okay, for everyone who answered that video, here's the next part of that. What if you knew at the end of the week, your child or your strange child or you were going to pass away? Would it change your answer? Okay, because a lot of them said off the bat, yes, I would. I'd reconcile without the death part. But many, 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 many equal amounts said absolutely not. I could care less. I'm so hurt. I can't do it anymore. It was just so, I don't even know. I don't trust that person. Wouldn't trust him today. I won't trust him tomorrow. Maybe I trust him in 25 years. We'd have to see. But, that was that. Trust is a big factor in this, the broken trust. But then some of them actually did, if they knew their child was going to die or they were going to die at the end of the week, they would have changed their mind and they would have reconciled. So my thinking is, well, if you can somehow figure out how to trust or live with an enough amount, or it's creating a dynamic where maybe we could figure it out, like how to be in this situation. If you could figure it out, why would you wait? Why would you wait if you can possibly figure out how to reconcile today? Because you don't know, then maybe you do it. Maybe if there's a way it can be done, then maybe you can do it. Because you may not have tomorrow. You may not have tomorrow. I may not have tomorrow. But the reality is, it's got to be a situation where you would feel like it's enough. It's worth it enough to want to do it. And there are many, many parents out there that are saying it's just not worth it to me anymore. Yeah. Which
reconciliation is for you. You know what I mean? Like, if you're going to reconcile, it's because you feel like you need it, right? But the thing that happens with estrangement is the ambiguity. We call it a living loss, meaning, there is my child or my parent that's physically somewhere, and I have this lot, like I have no way to engage with them, so imagine, so that ambiguous loss or the living loss, it's also disenfranchised, like I mentioned with your book, because you are not supposed to say that you estrange yourself from your child, because it's not a social norm, right? And you're not supposed to say you estrange yourself from, even Dr. Pilmer's work. Most people are like, if you talk to a neutral third party, they'll say like, what happened, right? So there's a disenfranchised piece to it, because society's like, what is wrong with you that you don't have a relationship with your child? Like, what did you do? You must have done something terrible.
Right.
So that's a disenfranchised piece, that society does not recognize that, no, something complicated has happened. I may not even know what's happened, but there's a lot of shame with parents, because the shame is that you did something to cause this.
Right. And I think what's another thing that he points out is that estrangement doesn't happen overnight. It's not something, it's a building of things. It's a building, it's a building, it's a building, it's a building. And then finally there's that volcanic moment where you just can't, like, it just dawns on you that there's nothing left here. There's nothing you can do anymore. There's just nothing. And it will wash over you to the point where you're like, now, I gave you the benefit of the doubt, gave you the benefit of the doubt, gave you the benefit of the doubt, kept trying to work with you, kept trying to, and finally you just realize that actually helped to create the estrangement, because it just was constantly, it was a constant building up. And then, but there was no other way around it either. So you're sitting there and you're saying, I physically, and I've heard this from a lot of parents, I physically cannot do this anymore. A lot of parents still want to do it. They still want to do it at that time. They physically cannot do it anymore.
Well, remember, the parents are older. So the parents can't take the emotional hits like you used to. Like it's kind of like, I can't lift 200 pounds. Like, don't ask me, I can't do it. I don't have the capacity. So many parents have lived experiences, have lived a lot of life. They don't have it in them. Like, they just don't have the capacity, and they're worn out. Right. So that is, and even when you, when you start to talk about this and you start to talk, I call it the in-between. So I think that's something I like to talk about when I'm in session with someone or I'm working with someone. I talk about the in-between, because I'm so privileged to have wonderful people that I see. And I will tell you, when I see younger people, especially like I was telling you about this brother and this sister, and this brother has so much compassion for this sister. And interestingly enough, do you know how much money this father had spent legally fighting? I mean, now he's like, I wish I just would have like not done any of the legal stuff with the mother. $2.3 million putting children through college, legal, horseback, everything. And this particular dad, it was 4 years of mourning children, like mourning, and the shame involved, right? So I call it the in-between. So here's an example. If somebody, they have kind of a tenuous relationship with their mother, and their child says, hey mom, why do you speak to nanny or something like that? Because the child only knows nanny is like nanny, like what's wrong with you? Or like, where's your dad? Do you have a dad? Like, where's your dad? You gotta have a dad. So then you start being in this spot. This is where the kids come in, and this piece comes in, the in-between. The grandkids don't know the in-between. They only know, like, where are my grandparents? Where's your mom? Where's your dad? Like, they want their grandparents, right? They don't know the in-between. So, what I talk about the in-between in session, like, your in-between is impacting your children. Like, this is generational, right? Meaning, does that make sense? So when you think about, as if you are the estranged child, think about the in-between for your child, like, because your child's going to be like, well, you have to have a mom or dad, or you have to have, like, okay, I work a lot in reproductive health. So we use, embryo donors, sperm donors, things like that. But, kids want to know, like, where's your dad? Where's your mom? Like, where are they? They don't know the in-between, Laura. The in-between is the estrangement, and the in-between is the ambiguity. The in-between is the pain and the sadness and the loss. And I'm sure you felt this when your husband died. The yearning is the most powerful emotion you'll ever feel when someone is not here. Because as a parent, or when someone has, and again, that ambiguous loss, that invisible living loss, that yearning to hug your child or hug your parent, that it's real, visceral, physical, mental pain. And Gina Maffa, who I love, she's a licensed clinical social worker in New York. She wrote a beautiful book about this, which I'll send to you to put out. I put it on my Instagram the other day, where she puts it all together about the losses and how complicated it is, and that in between impacts these grandkids, and then it impacts the grandparents. And it's, quite frankly, grandkids can be weaponized. They're a very strong tool.
Oh my God. And it's happening more and more as well. Right. And to that point, the in-between, you have to think about in this situation too, when you're doing that, when you're taking grandkids away from their grandparents. You have to think about what, 7 generations down the road, because that's the lifespan of this estrangement. When it's 7 generations. So what do you want the 7th generation? What do you want your great grandkids' lives to look like? Because you're impacting them now by making the decision to keep your kids away from your parents, or keep, what I'm saying? So that's a whole other thing. That's very real. And it's not just about you. You're affecting your entire family tree, so to speak, and it's terrible to see that. I see it all the time with grandparents that can't see their grandkids. They can't see them, and they were very much a part of their lives. And there's a lot of calls right now for grandparents' rights, and what's a grandparents' right in your state, and what's that because of this, which, is it better or worse?
But Dr. Pilmer's work, he's a sociologist. I mean, he talked about, how it weakens resilience across generations, because it was 150 years it impacts, like once there's an estrangement, and the loss of the protective and even financial supports that children and grandchildren, et cetera, see, and just the cutoffs and the repeated pattern. This is how mom or dad, or, this is how they problem solve, by cutting someone off. So if you're repeating it, like you're setting your kids up for, like, well, my parents didn't speak to this or that, or I didn't speak to, so you have to think about all of that, and the public health issue again. Interestingly enough, too, if a parent is in the hospital or a child is in the hospital, and we have to do a legal next of kin, and legal next of kin is legal next of kin if that child is not married. Well, guess what? If you can't find that parent or that child, it's an issue for the hospital system. Like, this is a community health issue. This is a bigger issue, right? That even in the state of Pennsylvania, to be cremated, if you don't have a spouse, all of your siblings have to sign off on the cremation. Well, if you're estranged and you can't get that, you may not be able to have that cremation, right? So, I mean, it goes to a larger, broader social issue. And I think that it's not something that we discuss, right? The social issues, but we're also showing our children how we problem solve or not. And that, and you can only tell the stories about your parents for so long.
Right.
Or your siblings, or grandparents, or whatever is happening. But it's really comparable, and the research shows, to a major public health concern. And I think that's what concerns me, because it's like, it's almost like, I'll go to McDonald's, I want a cheeseburger, a Coke, and no contact.
Right. That's what it's become.
Yeah. And it's like, and when you have people, and I will tell you, when I see younger people, so younger adults, not teenagers, because I don't see teenagers, they have so much anxiety because they're so conflict avoidant. So there's so much anxiety of the nervousness and even how to broach this. So again, the importance of talking about it before there's the rift or the rupture. Like, it should be part of how do we problem solve as a family?
I think that conflict avoidance is a huge issue today. And I think that, combined with lack of communication skills, huge issue today, for a variety of reasons. We don't really need to engage, especially today with social media and with tech and what have you, and phones. I think that really has impacted, so like the computers are supposed to cut down on the paper usage, but it just actually escalated it. Same thing. I think, where it was supposed to help us to communicate more, but we're the most separate society and world I've ever seen in my lifetime. And I think it's only going to get worse. You don't have to communicate. You don't have to get in the same, you don't have to learn the finer skills of communication. You don't have to learn the finer skills of behavior. You don't even have to move out of your own house if you wanted to. You can get pretty much everything that you need to just exist in a box. And I think that's not helping these kids at all. They're becoming efficient. Like they can, master AI, and they can master Chat GPT, and they're very efficient robots, but they can't, down to the personal, they can't communicate. Their social skills and their ability to connect with others is very transactional, and they blame you for that. But the reality is, there's a lot of transactional relationship, lack of building going on, and that's even transferring over to their own personal relationships where they don't want to have them. They don't want to have dating relationships. They don't want to have, and they're on such fast forward. They want to go from, meeting someone to being married in 2 minutes. They don't want to like have the building, because everything is so fast today. And it also burns fast too. So, I mean, there's just so much to this. So that when you talk about a public health crisis, this spans beyond just estrangement. This touches every aspect of our society.
But nobody covers it. Nobody covers it. Our last Surgeon General, he talked about the epidemic of loneliness, and that's not just parents, right? That's young folks, that's older folks, that's everyone. And we also know that it's so easy to send a text, we don't have to talk anymore, that type of thing. So again, how do we want to communicate? And I have read texts on all sides, and many things you would say in text you would never say in person.
Yeah.
I think you agree with that.
Yeah.
So that's added to it.
That's why I've always instilled the rule. I am not having an important conversation, an argument. I'm not doing anything on text. Text to me is for, where are we meeting, what time, how long do we need to be there, and what present do you want me to bring? That's what text is for. It's not to have a conversation. If I'm going to have a conversation, I'm going to pick up the phone, or WhatsApp or what have you, depending on where they are in the world.
And I think that parents, because we do have less telomeres, we do have less T cells, we do have less immunity because of our just aging. You have to be very, very careful in taking care of yourself. So it's okay to step back from a situation that's not healthy for you. It's
Right.
okay to say, you know what,
Yeah.
I need some time because I'm getting sick. Like, I'm not sleeping. I'm perseverating. I'm ruminating. I'm worried. Will I ever see my grandchildren? Will my kid ever talk to me again? Meanwhile, our kids are usually at a point where they're living life. They're trying to get their jobs, their whatever relationships. And, most parents at a point in their life, the expectation is, well, I thought I was going to have my kids around, or I thought I was going to have my grandkids around. So it's really important for parents to take a step back and say, you know what, I'm going to go to my family practice doctor. I'm going to get a physical. I'm going to tell them what's going on. I'm going to talk to them about my sleep. I'm going to look at my nutrition. I'm going to say, am I drinking water? Look, this stuff leads to GI issues, constipation, diarrhea. I mean, this is on a real basic level.
Yeah.
And really talk to your PCP or whoever you get your healthcare information from and say, I'm really struggling with this. And, I'm worried about my health. And it's okay to even say, I need to take a break because I am getting sick. I am missing work, or,
Right.
I have to, maybe I've spent a good part of my financials and helping my kids, and I don't have enough for my retirement, and I'm missing work. So that's what I'm saying. It's important for parents to say, stop pleading your case that be a good enough parent. Stop pleading and saying, but I did this for you, I did that for you. Hey, you got to take care of yourself. That's a really important message.
That's a message that I'm actually, we just moved into it this week on my platforms, is I'm put a new tagline. It's do not stew. Do not stew.
I saw that. Was that today?
Because I'm seeing so many estranged parents ODing on estrangement content, and there's a place for everything. There's a place to talk about this, and there's a place to lean in each other's shoulders and cry, and there's a place to strategize, what do I do now, and but at some point you have to get to the point where and it's a decision. It's a decision. It's not just, you have to decide not to stew. You have to decide that, you know, when you finally do say, hey, look, I'm having a health issue. I don't feel well. And
you have to choose yourself, right? You have to
right,
say, you know what, it's not selfish.
And it's very hard though for an estranged parent, because, you know, this is a real thing. They say, well, you have to forgive for yourself. You have to forgive not for them. Well, it's very hard to forgive for yourself when you have not for anything. That's the first act that you're doing to, when you finally figure out how to reprioritize yourself, you have to forgive for yourself. But you know what? I don't feel like forgiving, and I'm not ready to forgive for myself, even if it is for myself, because I'm so spent.
You see how that's so taboo, right? But that's totally legitimate that you feel like that. That's a lived experience that you have, and parents are often invalidated because you're supposed to love unconditionally. They were just kids. They were just kids. They're 40-year-olds. They were just kids. No, you're not kids. You know, I'm responsible for your mental health, you know, until you're 18. Of course, you know, I feel responsible more than that. But my point is that, you know, no, when you're 35, 40 years old, you are not a kid. This is a choice, right? And so you're allowed, it's giving parents permission to say, I got to take care of myself because I only have, like Mary Oliver, what are you going to do with this one wild and precious life? You only get one shot. And you know that better than anyone with your husband.
Right.
And
Right.
you're it for your kids.
Right. 100%.
No backup time.
Right. And you know, I know from a personal experience how hard it is to put myself first, because you spend your life putting yourself second because you want the best for your kids. You want to give them a wonderful life. You want to, you know, especially having gone through what my family went through, which many families go through tragedy, but you look at it and you say, if I can, you know, make these, you know, help these kids to get to the place that they need to go in their lives and give them a wonderful life, despite the fact that this situation is quite honestly really shitty. And no one prepares you for this, and you didn't even know how you were going to react when this all happened. And you know,
don't forget, when your husband died, you lose your future.
Yeah, you lose everything. You lose everything. You have to restructure everything. You have to build everything. You have to make sure that you have an income. You know, you have to make sure everything, which does not mean to say that any of the mistakes you made doesn't have an impact. All right. But it does mean that no one prepares you for what life can throw you, whether it be a death, whether it be a divorce, whatever it is. And when you're used to then you know, doing for others, it's very hard to all of a sudden switch gears and say, I have to now take care of myself, because it's looking a little bit like these others didn't get the memo that I did this from my heart. And, you know, and now it's, you know, this is what this is. So you have to protect yourself. You have to learn to protect yourself. And, you know, you have to learn to take care of yourself. And it's hard. It's hard because it's not your first instinct, even under the situation of estrangement. You still want to take care of them, you know, and you want to somehow fabricate that reconciliation. But, you know, there are certain cases where it's not conducive, at least at the time. It's not conducive, at least at the time.
And by having these conversations, right, it's okay to say, you and I are going through a really difficult period. We're going to take a break. We're not going to, like, no contact. We're going to take a break. But, like, these are conversations we should have, instead of making it like, well, you are a rotten parent because if your kid doesn't talk to you, you did something wrong, right? That's that judgmental piece. And that's that societal. That's why I said, you know, when I was reading your book, it's like, boy, she was brave, because, like, it's so taboo to do what you did.
Yeah.
You're not, and you put yourself out there, right? And people are like, she did this, she did that. But you know what? I got it. Like, when I started following you, she's trying to start a conversation.
Right.
You know, is what she's trying to do. And I think I messaged you that. And you know, I would share it with other therapists and things. And you know, you know, it is true. It's like, when we don't talk about things, they don't happen, but they do happen. Like I said, they happen to the very best of families. And when we look at, again, when you're working with parents, and I have to say to them, I talk about the health issue the physical mental health issue, again, even down to like her lack of oxytocin and dopamine and different strategies, and like trying some other EMDR techniques, anything you can do to calm your anxiety. But I also see, like I was telling you, that one influencer, whatever she is, making fun of parents. Like, these are people in pain, or children whose parents, they're estranged from, whatever, or the parental alienation thing. People are in pain. People generally don't want to be estranged. Now, there are some that are like, I don't care, whatever, but it's painful, and there's a lot of loss associated with it. And I think that when we look at again, I could go through all of we get tightness. We can get tightness and pressure in our chest. We can get shortness of breath, shallow breathing, heart palpitations, from the increased cortisol, the stress, muscle tension, neck aches, body aches, joint pain, all kinds of things, the GI upsets. Like, that's real life. And if someone's got to go to work like this, and you're 60, 70 years old, and you've got to do this, it's much harder to do this at that age than my kid has no empathy for me.
Right. No, it definitely is. You froze. So hopefully you go. Okay, good. Yeah. No, it definitely is. It definitely, like I said, I've heard the stories from these parents, what they've gone through physically, and, they really didn't know if they were going to survive. And so at some point you just have to, it's like, you have to take care of yourself. It really is the case. And if whether or not, anyone understands that, you have to do it for you. And I think that's something that's really imperative to do. And like I said, when I wrote the book, I wasn't, looking at it so much as brave as I wanted to establish, why it was that I was writing, I was in this situation. Like, I wanted to establish the story. So I did it as well as I could without over, leaving some the personal things that I wanted to leave personal, for the benefit of, my daughter, who I still love very much, and myself. But also, I wanted to establish the community, and that you got it, because I was establishing the conversation, and I knew I was getting hate. I was getting hate left, right, and sideways. All right, okay. And but I also opened up the conversation for so many, incredible parents. I have met so many nice parents with wild stories. I've met pastors who have this happening in their own homes. I've met therapists that are having this happening in their own homes, that they don't want to talk about it because they're worried about what it's going to cause their, their practice, or their, how are they going to be thought of?
There's a lot of shame. You did something wrong. There's something wrong. And I think that, I'm a huge proponent of narrative therapy. I love narrative therapy. It's the art of writing, whether it be creative journaling. And I think I said to you, like, I look at your book as narrative therapy. Mm-hmm. It was, it's how writing is how you tell your story. And somebody might say, well, why publish it? But it's your story. It's your lived experience. Why are you not allowed to publish it? Why are you not allowed to tell your story? Because you're a parent?
Right. And frankly, I wasn't embarrassed by my story, because I was, I'm not embarrassed by what happened in my story. And I don't understand, since it is my lived experience that can help. That was just a portion of the book. The rest of the book was, okay, this is what happened. This is why I'm here. I see you guys. You're reaching back to me. And now we have to, and there were other content creators, all other estrangement content creators, that had tried to do a bit of it, and had gotten so mulled over on social media that they stopped, or they were just their voices were so small. So when I came out with a bang, and all of a sudden it started. And then I saw slowly on the social media platforms, more people started talking, more people started talking, and more people started talking, and then it became louder and louder and louder and louder. And I'm happy for that. But like I also say, you have to do something at some point. You have to do something. You have to move beyond the estrangement, and you have to be able to re-engage in your life and make it amazing. Because some of these parents will never reconcile with their kids, and they're lingering in that space of hurt. They're lingering in that space of no movement forward. They're lingering in the space of just, this is me, the stewing space, what they call it.
Yeah.
And you can't do that either. You have to be able to pick yourself up and walk forward at some point. And it's not going to feel good. And there's no, it's not, okay, I'm ready to do it. That's not that moment. The moment is, no, maybe I'm not ready to do it. Maybe I don't know when that ready moment is going to happen, but I only have X amount of time. And I have to put my one foot in front of the other. And it's the same thing premises when, I wasn't ready to come out of, to walk forward when my husband died. I wasn't ready. But the next day, I had to put one foot in front and walk forward. And it wasn't easy. Not the days were easy. None of them were easy. And putting a smile and walking forward and walking into wherever I needed to walk into wasn't easy. That's the only way that gets you up and walking. And eventually you're more capable of tackling all of it, and it becomes easier with every new step, and that's really it. And then the rest figures itself out.
And parents need to have something for themselves. They cannot have their happiness dependent on their children, right? And so it's really important that when you are parenting, that you have something, that you are creating your own life, that your life does not revolve around your children, that you have your own interests and passions and friendships and things of that nature. That's not being selfish, that's being a whole person. And like I always encourage that piece of it, and I always encourage I call it a grief squall, kind of akin to like a major snow squall, like all of a sudden the snow comes down, you can't see. And like you said, to be really careful that you're not spending your days perseverating and scrolling, and your whole life does not become your child's estrangement or your estrangement from your sibling, or, you have to live your life. Right. And you hope that there will be reconciliation if it's good for you and it's good for the other person. You also hope that you can maybe get people to speak to that may not be engaged, in the situation, that can be maybe a level playing field, or someone, where you're not sitting in, just with somebody that's kind of feeding you and saying, oh gosh, your parents are off, or this is blah, 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 blah. So when we look at this, it's really important that you avoid those grief squalls, that you say, I'm consuming way too much of this. I'm reading way too much. That's why I love Dr. Pillamer's book. That's education. Yeah. That's education that also normalizes, believe it or not, it normalizes estrangement. It differentiates no contact from estrangement. It also talks about real plausible reconciliation. There are parents that may not want to write apology letters. They may feel like, what am I going to write an apology letter for? And then there are parents that are fine with doing that, or, whatever. But I think avoiding those grief squalls and saying, I need to create my life. Like, I need to continue to live. It's so painful to not see your grandchildren. The stories that I hear it's heartbreaking, right? And again, that goes to the generational loss, and it goes to the in-between. And really, if your parents are good people, you're really harming your own children by denying that relationship, because grandparents are a special relationship. But, I always caution parents to make sure you are taking good care of yourself. And most parents don't know how to take care of themselves.
They don't. That's a great spot to stop on. Mm-hmm. And that's a great spot to pick up on again, because you have to come back, because that's a whole other conversation I want to have with you. Yeah. It's really important. And especially in relation to, the impact of not doing so on the larger whole. All right. So on the other family members that are still there, and then your community, and then overall just the public health system and whatnot. So
well, I applaud you for doing this, and look, I've seen the hits that you've taken you know, and it's hard to put yourself out there. It's hard to tell your story. But you know what? It's even more difficult to sit in silence and to be in pain, whether you are a child that's estranged from a parent or a parent with a child. There's a lot of pain involved on all sides of this. I don't really know anyone that loves being estranged from, because we need our families, you know, when they're healthy families. So, you know, my focus would be start to figure out how I'm going to take care of myself.
Right. I think it's a great focus. I think it's a great focus.
Yeah. So thank you for your work.
Oh my God, Christine, thank you for coming on. You'll be back. We have a whole other topic.
You know, and like I will send you Gina's book, Gina Moffa's book.
Please,
I think Fault Lines in Gina Moffa's book to understand what your body's going through with this, because this is real grief and loss, folks. This is no joke. For a child, for an adult child, for parents, for everyone. Parents love their children, whether you're a parent that's been divorced and alienated for 25 years, you deeply love that child and welcome them back, or whether it's a riff or whatever. You know, we need families and we need one another. Again, disclaimer, of course, I'm not going to get into trauma because I don't think that's what we were talking about with this.
Right.
But, you know, take care of yourself and figure out what does that look like for you.
Terrific. Thank you. Thank
You're
you.
welcome. All right.
See you soon. Thank you very much.
Send you the book. I will send you Gina's book.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I can't wait to read it. I'm going to finish this one that I'm reading now and then go on to that next one. I'm getting a lot of great books. So it's just incredible. I'm a great reader.
It's great. Like I said, I think educating yourself, what can I do in the meantime to take care of myself?
I think it's I agree with that 100%.
All right. Take care. Have a good weekend. All right.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
There you go. She is a fantastic interview, a great voice, and she really gets this whole thing. So I'm going to bring up, once again, Fault Lines. Please get the book, okay, by Dr. Carl Pilmer, Cornell University. It is such a fantastic book, and you're going to learn a lot, and it's going to clarify things that you might not think about with regards to your own estrangement, but it's an extremely valuable read. And my book, Doormat Mom, No More, you can get it on Amazon. It's been a very interesting book to have written and shared. I do talk a little bit about my own story to set precedent for why I'm here, as well as open up the conversation around the larger community that had gone missing until now. You'll see a lot of trolls who left remarks that haven't even read the book, but just know that you need to pick it up. It's a great book, and my heart and soul is in it. So there you go. All right. That's it for Doormat Mom No More. I know this one is a little longer than usual, but there's a lot more to talk about. So please come back. And in the meantime, have a great weekend and figure out something to do to stop stewing and start doing, okay, for your own life. It's really important. And that especially includes taking care of yourself. All right, ciao.